on Zoom and at Chabad House. Good to see you. Good to be continuing our discussion. So, yesterday we were talking about the tzibale, the onion. And we said that the onion has many, many layers. And likewise, when you study Torah, there are various layers of Torah study, of the way to understand the wisdom. And we discussed this yesterday about the various aspects of Torah. And we said how you could look at things from different angles. And if you take something and put it under the microscope in the lab, you'll obviously have a different perspective than just seeing it with a naked eye. Just as a doctor has different ways of seeing things than the typical person might, because you're able to perceive it from a whole different perspective. So that's one aspect that we discussed. And this is basically where the works of Hasidus are in a sense different from typical Kabbalah. The goal of Hasidus is for a person to not only become aware of the divine core of reality, but for the awareness to change one's perception of reality on the surface. This is the concept of Chabad, which we were discussing. Chabad being an acronym of Chachma, Bina, Dat, without going into Chachma and Bina right now, which loosely is translated as wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. What's the idea of understanding? It's about implementation, about making it part of my life. Hasidus wants us to identify what's really going on and then to redefine to use that itself to implement it in my life and redefine it. Every facet of our lives to be impacted by that prism, by that perspective. And in that sense, Hasidus is like a set of eyeglasses, basically. It allows us to see inside out. It allows us to see with these lenses, not to blur our view of the surface in favor of the core, but rather bring the surface sharply into focus in light of the core, that you understand and you perceive the divinity, the godly reality and everything. That's a life-changing paradigm. The ability to completely change the whole narrative of reality. Hasidus shows us the inside story. You open a verse of Chumash, you study a law, halacha, in the code of Jewish law, or you read a complex situation or story in the Talmud, or a particular custom, but without sacrificing the simple meaning. We understand it on the surface, but then we go into the depth. And it brings the simple, but without sacrificing. It takes the simple, it gives it meaning to life. And this works not only in Torah scholarship, in every part of our lives. I was just looking at the very Chumash reading we read today. We read the story about Joseph and his dreams. Yesterday we talked about how this idea that he's out in the field, and the field represents the outside world and how we have to impact and illuminate the world around us. But of course, it goes much deeper than that. For example, when Joseph is coming back, Joseph is looking for his brothers. And the verse says he encountered a person, or Vayimtze'ehu Ishra, that the person found him and asked him, how can I be of service to you? What can I do? How can I help you? And you look, first of all, the lessons in every single verse, that it's not his story, but it's our story. So, firstly, there's no chance encounter. Every person we meet, there's depth, there's meaning, there's purpose. The fact is that this person says, how can I help you? Very different than in last week's parsha, where he just bumps into the angel. There, Rashi tells us it was Esav's archangel. Here, Rashi says it's the angel Gabriel.
You also write something on the bank when you
yeah. Now, or can I do that after 11? So, what's the difference? What's the difference between the archangel of Esav versus Malach Gabriel? the angel who says, how could I help you? How could I be of service to you? That's an angel who serves God. Then other commentaries say Ish was not necessarily an angel. Maybe it was literally a person. Who the person is, we're not sure. We don't know who this person is. But I think it's Nachmanides who says something very interesting, points out whoever this person was, whether it's a person or angel, I think it's an important lesson, is look what a difference this person made. Imagine Joseph would not have responded, would not have been, there was nobody there to tell Joseph where his brothers were. And Joseph would not have been, his brothers would not have attempted to kill him or to sell him as a slave. And then he would not have wound up in Egypt. And he would not have been thrown into jail in Egypt. He would not have interpreted Pharaoh's dreams. And would not have become the viceroy. Would not have come to save all of Egypt from its economic collapse. Would not have had his brothers in the famine coming down to Egypt to seek food from him. And you look at each of those things, and then our ancestors would never have been slaves in Egypt. Who knows? Saw a great story recently about a particular person who was a paratrooper, part of the US Navy. Not a paratrooper, I think he was part of the Navy SEALs. He was on his plane, and he winds up having to, his plane is shot down by the Vietnamese, and his parachute deploys. He winds up being captured, becomes a prisoner of war. 6 years he lingers in a Vietnamese prison, and then he's finally released, goes on with his life. He's sitting at a restaurant in Miami Beach, Florida, years later. And there's a fellow looks at him, says, "Are you Charles so-and-so?" Forgetting his name, Charles. He says, "Yes." He tells him, "Were you in serving in Vietnam? Were you captured?" All the details. And he's like, "How do you know? Who are you?" He says, "I was a sailor on the ship with you. I'm the one who packed up your parachute that day." And the man looks at him and says, "You saved my life. If not for you packing my parachute, if not for deploying," you think about all the details, twists and turns. And then the man came up with a fascinating realization. He said, it's not only him. You think about the entire team, all the people who were present, everyone who made a difference, everyone who was there and was able to assist. It's all part of it. Do we ever ignore the ish? Do we ever ignore a person or realize that each person is indispensable to our life, to the plan of life, to everything we do? Do we ever ignore or dismiss or take people for granted? Now, I don't mean to digress. I'm just showing you how with Chassidus, you look at a verse and you get a much deeper understanding. You look at the verse yesterday where it describes that the brothers took Joseph and they put him into a pit. And the verse describes the pit, Habar reik ein bo mayim. The pit is empty without water. Says Rashi, it seems a little bit superfluous to say the pit is empty without water. So Rashi explains, you know what? There was no water in it, but snakes and scorpions were inside the pit. It was dangerous. It was lethal. Come along the Hasidic masters and say, what has this got to do with me and you? There's a story that happened to Joseph many years ago. And there may be many, many other details in the story that are not included. The fact that these details are included serves as a lesson to us. In a sense, the bar could be compared to our mind. What's our mind filled with? So our Hasidic masters tell us, if the bar is reik, if our mind is empty, and there's no mayim, there's no water. Water is a symbolism of Torah. Torah, just as water quenches the thirst of an arid body, Torah quenches the thirst of an arid soul. So if there's no Torah, if a Jew's day goes by without meaning, without purpose, without Torah study, it's empty. Then snakes and scorpions creep in. Then what happens is we have other things that occupy our mind that perhaps can be not so healthy, can be lethal. And especially these days with our devices and all, easier than ever to have all types of corruption of our mind. So when you look at it from this perspective, Chassidus helps us to define everything in our life based on this narrative of Torah and to apply it to our life, not just to see it as his story, but to see it and experience it as our story. And this is why Chassidus places a tremendous emphasis, not only in studying it cerebrally, but there's a concept called avoda. What's avoda? Avoda is digesting it, making these teachings part of our lives. The idea in Chabad of Chachma Bina Das is about implementing it by training ourselves to see the spiritual reality as the reality. This inside-out approach becomes intuitive. It's our default way of thinking, behaving, reacting to the world around us. That's the Hasidic way. And this is a tremendous, not just innovation, the idea that the Baal Shem Tov taught us was that nobody's superfluous. Every person has a mission and purpose to fulfill in this world. We can't just see things from the naked eye. From the naked eye, this looks like a wooden table, right? But if we start looking at it deeper, we know that from each thing, we know the molecules and all the different atoms that everything the world is made up with. And hopefully understand the basic difference between Kabbalah and Chassidus. Yes, Kabbalah gives us that deep reality. But Chassidus tells us that we're able to merge the material and physical realities, not just under the microscope, but in our daily living, to implement, to make it part of our life. Let me share with you a little interesting insight from the Rebbe Rashab, one single sentence, where he says, let's read it. It seems quite abstract at first, and maybe even radical, but I hope you'll get an appreciation and understanding from this, the basic difference between Kabbalah and Chassidus, that Chassidus gives us not just the focus, but the implementation of making it real and part of our lives. So here's what he says. The teachings of Kabbalah made man out of godliness, whereas the teachings of Chassidus made godliness out of man. Understand this? What's he trying to say? Let's analyze it. Let's rethink these words. The teachings of Kabbalah made man out of godliness, whereas the teachings of Chassidus made godliness out of man. Kabbalah and Chassidus both speak about the nature of God and spirituality. Chassidus takes these deep mystical concepts of Kabbalah and makes it palpable and ways that we can understand it. They speak about the nature of people and the world that we live in, but they work, the ideas are completely different. Kabbalah decodes humanity in order to better understand the Almighty, while Chassidus decodes God in order to better understand humanity and our indispensable role in this world, because each of us is here. The fact that we're born means we matter. We're indispensable to God's plan for this world. So what is my purpose? When you study Chassidus, you get a better understanding of that. So let's now try to see how these foundations, how these ideas of the Hasidic teachings serve as the common thread between all, how this can fit into every aspect of our life. And if we had time, we could do this for dozens of teachings of the Baal Shem Tov and the Alter Rebbe, and we could apply this to many aspects, but of course, we only have a limited amount of time each day. So let's just look at a few ideas. Let's try, and we're gonna put on the different lenses we were talking about, a new set of glasses. We use the inside-out Hasidic perspective that the Baal Shem Tov tried to implement, to teach. So here we are. Here's a teaching of the Baal Shem Tov. Okay, let's read it together. He says, divine providence extends to this world as much as it does to the supernal realm. Events ranging from the journey of a detached leaf fluttering in the wind to a worm slithering in the desert or in a city, to a conversation between fish in the sea, to the minute movements of the smallest creatures found in the ocean, all take place by divine providence. This is a very famous teaching of the Baal Shem Tov. Now, if you're wearing your Hasidic glasses now and seeing things through this prism, through these lenses, then we behold a most remarkable perspective of the world around us. And not just the big things, but everything going on. You see many people in this world believe in God, believe in the greatness of God as the omnipotent creator and power. And let me tell you, across the board, even people who perhaps prescribe to, there are people who are, Buddhists and Hindus who maybe believe in polytheism, but even in those beliefs, they believe in a higher power. They subscribe to this idea of a higher power. But many believe that because God is so great, that God is too great to concern himself with the pettiness of this world and the very finite creatures, us who inhabit this world, right? How could such a great infinite power possibly care about or even have the time and headspace to worry about all the nonsense in this world? That's certainly a perspective. Even within Judaism, there are schools of thought that believe that way. And maybe that's exactly why so many people are walking around this world feeling like their entire life is the result of some kind of great tragic mistake. A person comes to believe that a mistake made by someone who raised them leaves them damaged, or that a mistake that maybe they made themselves in business, that's why they're impoverished, or that a mistake made in a relationship leaves them unhappy. Right? In fact, a person comes to believe that they only ended up here by some fluke, that probably the parents never wanted them to begin with. And if so, the sum of their life is all one big monumental error. It's all a mistake. And sadly, these days, there's a lot more suicide on the horizon. Can't go into too much detail, but let me tell you the number of attempted suicides that I'm aware of, and successful ones too. There are people who really feel this way, and I've encountered. And it's our task, our job, we're all in this together. Sometimes when a person feels this way, they fail to see the hand of God. They don't feel God in their life. But the Baal Shem Tov taught that everything in this world, big and small, regardless of what it is, every single situation in my life occurs, as we say, by hashgacha pratis. There's a carefully crafted divine master plan that accounts for every detail of existence. That's why the fact that we exist means we matter, that we're indispensable to the divine plan. It means we have to think about this. It means that God knows about everyone and everything that happens. And it means that God cares about everything and everyone that exists. Of course, we're all required in order to complete the great plan of creation. And that plan cannot happen if not for every single one of us having our purpose. There's no coincidences, no mistakes. Everyone's here, part of a purpose. So we don't see it. If you look at an onion without glasses, there's various layers. It's all coincidence. But now if you're going to go to the core, God is aware of all creatures and events, Everything is required to fulfill that divine mission and purpose. Very famous, there's a song Avram Fried sings, comes from Yom Tov Erlich, who was a beautiful Yiddish composer. I could only sing the last line to you in Yiddish. The rest of it is a beautiful song. I'll have to put it on some other time. The song goes, Und der kleiner Vermul ist eingeschlafen süß. If you never heard the song, it's based on a story, a parable. The Baal Shem, well, I don't know if it's a parable. I think it's a story that actually happened. The Baal Shem Tov was walking with some of his students, and there was a very strong wind. And of course, maybe it was autumn, so the leaves were falling from the trees. So in discussion, the Baal Shem Tov asked one of his students, one of the disciples, to turn one of the leaves. And what did he see when he lifted it? He saw that there was a small little worm. And the Baal Shem Tov explained there that this poor worm sat on that leaf and was suffering from, just a second, guys, from the scorching sun, from the heat of the sun. And God sent the wind so that the leaf would fall with it. And this leaf would have the shade, as the song goes. Und der kleine Vermul ist eingeschlafen süß. Guys, hold on 1 second, please. Okay, I'm back. Let me just see, actually, if I can find a song, I will share it with you. So what would we call it? Let me see if Avram Fried worm song. I'm not sure what else to call the song. Let me see if I could find it. And I'll play it for you. If it is The Little Leaf, that's what it's called. The song is called The Little Leaf. Let me see if there's a music video for it. Give me a second, guys. Gonna see if we can find this little video. Hold on a second. Hold on, guys. Just a sec. I don't know if you can hear. I'm sharing. I have the sound. Hold on a second. Just a second, guys. Okay, guys, I'm gonna pause it. Let me share it. Hold on a second. Okay, I'm gonna share the song. Let's see if this goes. Optimize, share sound. Let's just see how do you share. And is this it?
ראיתי כבר רוחות עזוב ורעמים אתה עלה קטן מתנועע
Could you guys hear?
Steht da Bäume in der Mitte weg, mit die Zweigen herausgesteckt, und aber Blätter reißt sich hoch, und es fällt da raus. Und der Blätter reißt sich hoch, und es fällt da raus. Geht da Zadigi euch zum Weg, und die Blätter gibt da Freck, aber was bist du von der Bäume weg, und liegst in mitten weg? Aber was bist du von Bäume weg, und liegst in mitten weg? Ihr sagt die Blätter, ich weiß nicht was, ich bin nicht der Balliboss. Mein Zweigott plötzlich sich zerbiegt und mir herabgeflickt. Mein Zweigott plötzlich sich zerbiegt und mir herabgeflickt.
I don't know if you understand it. I'm just gonna see if I can find it in English for you.
Ich bin nicht der Balliboss, der Wind hat plötzlich Gesicht zerbelost und die Blätter abgelost. Der Wind hat plötzlich zerbelost und die Blätter abgelost. Oh ja, ja, ich bin der Wind, der Balliboss. Jetzt sagst du mir was. Du hast plötzlich sich zerbelost und die Blätter abgelost. Du hast plötzlich sich zerbelost und die Blätter abgelost. Sagt der Wind, ich weiß nicht was.
Just a second, let's see if I can find more to this.
Ich bin nicht der Ballboss. Der Beschäfer von der Welt hat mir so befehlt. Der Beschäfer von der Welt hat mir so befehlt.
Okay, guys, so this beautiful little song that I just played for you is a song by Yom Tov Ehrlich. I used to listen to his music when I was a kid, and it's a really nice song about a little leaf. Like I just said, I told you the story, but if I could give you the Yiddish, he says the tree stands tall and high, the branches reaching for the sky. A little leaf without a sound, the tzaddik is passing by. Okay, you know what? It's not going to work in English. Better to hear it from them. If you heard it in the background, as I tried to just play it for you, sharing the sound, I hope you enjoyed it. Otherwise, you could just Google Avram Fried Leaf. Now, he has two songs called Leaf. This one's called The Little Leaf. This one's called The Leaf. The other one's called The Little Leaf. And it's the story that I just shared. So I'll try to play some more Yom Tov Ehrlich for you some other time. What I'm trying to say is the idea of divine providence, the concept that nothing that happens in this world happens for no reason. The Rebbe once compared this to a successful balabasta who runs her home, knows exactly what's going on. She knows exactly where everything in the house is. But more importantly, she knows why everything is where it is. A home run this way is not just organized. It's a home in which every single object serves a purpose. Sometimes that purpose is the very fact that having that, your first grade spelling test in a drawer makes you feel, whatever it might be, why you have that thing there. God runs the world. God knows where everything is and why, which means everything that exists and everything that happens has a fundamental purpose. God is not only present when we behold a beautiful sunset, say, wow, how majestic. God is also there when maybe we lay in bed at night and we can't quite make sense of what's happening in our lives, what's going on in the world. For some reason, God wants it to be that way. I don't understand it. It's God's way, God's purpose, God's the balabas. The point is, I'm not saying that or justifying pain and suffering, saying, oh, it's divine providence. God forbid. But by wearing this lens of divine providence that the Baal Shem Tov taught, that empowers us to know and to really feel that everything that happens is part of God's master plan. It allows us in any situation that we find ourselves, to find God speaking through it. Sometimes God speaks to us from the light, sometimes from the darkness. But God's always there. I think that's very important to realize. Somebody was telling me that he was on a date, and the two of them, they got into conversation about the role of man and woman in a family life. So after all, he wants to get married. So he noticed that this lady, she could be very opinionated and stubborn. And he wanted to make sure that his place at the family decision table won't be harmed. So he was expressing his opinion. Anyways, she says, I believe that the big decisions are the man's responsibility, or the small decisions are the woman's responsibility. And, this is basically the decision they made. Years later, I'm there. We're doing an art show in their house, because I used to, before I moved back to South Africa, I was the manager of an artist in New York, and we would do a lot of exhibitions. We would travel around the world doing exhibitions, sometimes in galleries, sometimes in people's homes, sometimes in shows. This particular time we're in this house where I'm hearing the story, and I see that she's making the decisions where everything is. So he explained to me, he says, it's very simple. I learned after years of being married that I thought I make the big decisions, and yet I'm finding that every decision she's making. So he says, eventually one evening, sat down to have this conversation, and he says, I don't understand. I thought I'm making the big decisions. Everything you decide. So she says, sure. You get to make the big decisions of humanity. Whether there should be peace with Iran, or how to deal with COVID-19, all the big decisions in life you get to make. The small decisions of life, that's my responsibility. She decides where the art goes in the house, and where the kids are going, and where they're going to live. Why do I say this? Because obviously God is present within all the decisions, the big and the small. That's the point. And divine providence doesn't just apply to those watershed moments in our lives, but also to the nitty-gritty details of the daily grind. It applies not only to human beings, but like the song I played for you before in the story we told, it applies to a little worm. It applies to animals, to plants, to even inanimate objects, to everything. The Baal Shem Tov's perspective that he taught of divine providence is that God not only determines every aspect of life, of who I marry, and whether my efforts in business will succeed or fail, but also which tree that squirrel is going to climb, and what it's going to eat for breakfast, and how it's going to find it. So the next time you're out in Umschlanga and you're hoping for a godly experience, you don't just have to be on the beach, anywhere. Remember, to find God, you don't have to gaze at the brilliant sunshine, at the stars, at the galaxies. God is there just as much as God is in the sand right there on the beach in front of you. Each and every grain exists by divine providence. Yeah. And that's something important that we have to keep in mind. That's all part of the divine plan. All of us. Everything that goes on. So with that in mind, let me put my slideshow back on for you so we could see the Hasidic perspective and appreciate it. Excuse me. Everything in my life, everything that goes on, that's the Hasidic message. When we wear these glasses, we see that everything is with a purpose. Everything in my life. And with that in mind, let's look at this teaching of the Baal Shem Tov. Says the Baal Shem Tov, every single one of us is dear to God as an only child born to parents in their old age. Now it's interesting that he gives this metaphor because he himself was born in his parents' old age. That's why he was orphaned at a young age, because his parents were already elderly, and he was born by a blessing. They were very hospitable. The story goes they were born by a blessing of a visitor, but they didn't last very long after. I think he lost his mother in childbirth or as an infant, and then his father at the age of 5. His father said to him, to remember never to fear anything but God alone. Now, if we see it from this perspective, we're able to appreciate the depth of our connection with God. Many Jews believe that a connection with God is dependent on our behavior. So if it's dependent on my behavior, a person born with no inherent connection, by studying Torah, by observing mitzvahs, then that connection is established and deepened, right? So then a person studying all day or a person praying mightily, that person's precious in God's eyes. But what about me? I don't study. I don't pray. So what about me? If it's dependent on my actions, I can barely read Hebrew. I don't have time to do mitzvahs. I have to work. What kind of a connection could this kind of person have with God? And that was what a lot of people felt in that time. That's why the Baal Shem Tov had to implement, had to teach things. The Baal Shem Tov taught that this approach, that's not the way it works. It's not dependent on your behavior. Of course, your behavior could enhance it. The bond between us and God exists from the moment of birth. We said we're indispensable to God's plan. We're deeply connected to God because of who we are, regardless of what we do. So true, the more Torah that we learn and the more mitzvahs that we do, the more we reveal that connection. Regardless of what we do, that connection exists. So every single one of us, without exception, is indispensable and precious to God. That was the Baal Shem Tov's teaching. You wanted to say something, Roslyn?
Yes, the bond, does that bond not exist from the time of conception?
Absolutely.
Not, yes.
Okay, I mean, yeah, I guess, I mean, semantics, but yeah, absolutely. When I was at the Kinos 2 weeks ago, I heard a story about, it was a group of students, and the Rebbe asked them the psychodynamic approach, and somebody asked the Rebbe, if you think about the psychodynamic approach, Sigmund Freud, that man is fundamentally animalistic, that we're lowly, and he discovered the id inside of us, and that we have our libido and our temptations and all the other aspects of the human nature. But Hasidus, on the other hand, sees the essence of a human being as divine, it's pure. So which one are we? Are we the way Freud saw us, the psychodynamic approach, that we're animalistic, morally debased? And the Rebbe explained, even if we accept the assumption of that psychodynamic approach, there is no contradiction between the two. Imagine that you're standing in the garden. What do you see? Spectacular plants grow and bloom, and it's beautiful. Now, if you start digging under them, what are you going to find? That muddy, dirty soil. But if you do not stop there, and you continue digging deeper and deeper and deeper, as we've said it many times, you're going to find those precious natural treasures. You're going to see the inverted water, maybe even oil or precious metals, diamonds, rubies. So yes, the psychodynamic approach took the person who looked straight and decent, peeled off the first layer of the onion, and there you found an animalistic and dirty instincts. But Hasidus says, don't just find the id, dig deeper and uncover the yid. You sometimes have to peel off more layers until you get to the core, till you get to the essence, the natural treasure, the precious diamond. And of course, yes, you study Torah and you're righteous and you're pious. But is that can make your diamond sparkle? Yes. But we have to remind ourselves, even if we're righteous and pious and scholarly and study, the greatest virtue we have, says the Baal Shem Tov, is you are a prince or a princess. You're a child of God. The king loves you. And that's why the Baal Shem Tov liked the ordinary people and attracted so many ordinary, simple, maybe even ignorant, illiterate people. Because he saw their simplicity as a pure reflection of God. That was the Baal Shem Tov's way of seeing things. The story that once during Ne'ilah, at the end of Yom Kippur, the Baal Shem Tov cried and he was beseeching God and treating Hashem even more than usual. And his disciples, his students, understood that there was some kind of something big was happening above. And so they, of course, intensified their prayers as well. When everybody saw this, and the rest of the congregants, everybody's hearts were shattered. They also joined in this passionate supplication and prayer. And there was a young man there from a village who was completely illiterate, uneducated. And he stood the whole time looking at the face of the chazan. Couldn't say a word. He didn't know what's going on. He was, a simple villager from nearby. And he came to be Yom Kippur with the rest of them. But as a peasant kid, or maybe as a farmer, a shepherd or something like that, he knew the sounds of all the different farm animals. And he especially liked the crow of the rooster. So when he heard all the weeping and all the outcries of the people, his heart was also shattered. And he wanted to join, but he couldn't. He didn't know how to read Hebrew. He had no clue what they were saying there in their prayers. So you know what he did? He cried out, cock-a-doodle-doo, cock-a-doodle-doo, God have mercy. Everybody else looking at him thought he was Meshuggah. They were confused. They hear a voice of a crowing like a rooster. Some people said, shush, quiet down. All of a sudden, the Baal Shem Tov turned around and he smiled at this voice sound. And when the Baal Shem Tov after Yom Kippur was talking to students, he said, indeed there was a terrible decree on high. And I was praying very hard, and along with all your prayers, we were trying to beseech God Almighty to change that decree, and none of our earnest, sincere, genuine prayers were working. And suddenly the call of that village kid, that's what was heard in heaven. That's what pierced the heavenly throne. His sincerity is what brought tremendous pleasure on high. And so that nullified the decree. And that was the Baal Shem Tov, always looking, bringing in the simple people, saying there's no such thing as you're illiterate. What you know, the Rebbe would always say, Aleph, teach Aleph. Because that connection with God is inherent in our identity. Nothing in the world can break that. People could try to hide it, they could try to ignore it, try to forget about it, maybe never even be aware of it to begin with, but it's always there. It's present. Jackie Mason says Jews are trying to chop off their noses and dress like this and just like that so we don't look Jewish. At the end of the day, the Baal Shem Tov was saying, without any qualifications, you are as dear to God as an only child born to their parents in their old age as he knew. And these words, they ring really strongly when you realize that was the Baal Shem Tov's experience, how he knew his parents who were old and loved him, even though he was orphaned at a young age. That was the metaphor he used about every single one of us. And we have to remember that whether somebody believes in God or for some reason or other hasn't quite found that belief, God certainly believes in us. Hashem loves us. Nothing in the world can ever change that reality. God sees us as a prince and princess, and the truth is, I have to see myself that way too. Too many of us walk around with a sense of failure. I'm a nothing, I'm a loser. People tell us, people say all types of things. People have low self-esteems, right? We sometimes, tell anyone willing to listen. People have all types of reasons why they don't qualify, why they're no good. But if we put on the glasses of the Hasidic teachings, we realize we're indispensable indeed. We know that we exist, not just that we exist because God wants us here, but that we are the prince and princesses of God. And yes, sometimes even a prince or princess could get up to misbehavior, but I'm still a prince. I could still, even if I make mistakes, still a prince. I found a beautiful letter here that the Rebbe wrote to somebody. Let me just share with you. He says, I preempted you and responded even before you made your request. I already did precisely as you advised. And this letter is actually to my sister-in-law's grandfather. His name was Rabbi Moshe Yitzchak Hecht. Okay? And it's very interesting how the Rebbe writes to him. He says, Rabbi Moshe Yitzchak Hecht was sent to your city. It appears from your letter and from your previous letters that you're unfamiliar with Rabbi Hecht or the abilities and powers he has been granted. This is what the Rebbe is writing to Rabbi Hecht. In any event, endeavor now to acquaint yourself with him, and immediately everything will change. Your disposition, your trust in God, your everyday joy. Okay, now think about this. Who's the Rebbe talking to? To none other than Rabbi Hecht himself. Okay, he was the Rebbe's ambassador, the Rebbe's shliach, emissary to New Haven, Connecticut. He did a lot there, and he built a school and a community, and yet he wrote a letter to the Rebbe in which he outlined various hardships in his own activities, and he wondered if he could even continue his job, and he asked the Rebbe to help him. And the Rebbe basically told him, you have the goods. To cash it in, you need to get to know yourself. Not the way you think about yourself, which is an outsider perspective, but that knowledge of knowing who you are and appreciating who you are. Don't undersell yourself. The person you think you are is only the tip of the iceberg. Reminds me of sometimes how we see others. The famous story about one of the Rabbi Soloveitchiks. I don't remember which one, but he was once traveling, and it's a century or so ago. Came to a particular city. It's cold outside. He needs a place to sleep overnight. He comes to a Jewish inn. The innkeeper says, "Sorry, I have no beds available." He says, "Please, can't you find a room, a space?" He said, "No, get out of here." Being very, very rude to him. Eventually, let him sleep in the lobby next to the fireplace on the floor. In the morning, many of the guests came and recognized the great rabbi. So the people started gathering around the rabbi and saying, "What's going on? What are you doing here? What happened?" And when this host realized who his illustrious guest was, he felt really bad. And he started to apologize to the rabbi. He said, "I'm so sorry. I didn't realize who you are. If I only knew." So the rabbi said to him, "If that's the case, don't apologize to me. Why don't you apologize to the person who you thought I was?" Sometimes we undersell ourselves. Sometimes we underestimate others. So I think it's an important lesson that we have to take. I want to conclude today by showing you a video and continue this discussion, please God, tomorrow. But the idea that we discussed here is about looking at recognizing how our inner personality is pure. Nothing could change this fact. But when you put on the glasses, the perspective of the Baal Shem Tov, the Hasidic teachings, we realize that as a prince or princess of God, that God loves me eternally, regardless of my behaviors, regardless what I did. And I think that's a very important idea that we all have to implement in our own lives as well. Let me just get the video on here for you. Excuse me. Where is the video? I have the video open. Question is how I share it with you. see what he's seeing. Yeah, it's right here. Okay. We'll conclude with this, and I'll take any questions right after. Okay, guys. With this, we'll conclude today's share. Any questions? Well, thank you all. And please, God, I'll see you tomorrow.
Hi, I'm Professor Eugene